am the Go Beyond Beauty Specialist for the Northwest Michigan Invasive Species Network, of which the Grand Traverse Conservation District is our fiduciary agent for that program. So that's why I'm here. And I'm going to give you a little quick insight into what exactly the Grand Traverse Conservation District does before passing it off to Cheryl Gross, who we're all here to see tonight. But thank you all so much for attending. And I think we're going to have a really good evening of learning and excitement about native plants. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. We have a Q&A section where folks throughout the presentation can enter your questions, specific questions for Cheryl, for anyone. And I will be, myself and Allie from the district will be monitoring that Q&A and try to answer some of your guys' questions throughout the presentation. But also we'll be stopping a couple times with Cheryl to answer those questions, the ones that are relevant, but we'll be saving a majority for the end of the presentation. And if you guys have any just comments or quips or commentary, feel free to enter those in the chat section. And if you have any questions or technology issues, feel free to put those in the Q&A or the chat, and we can, Allie and I can see what we can do for you. So thank you so much. So a little bit about the Conservation District. We are in our 81st year. And we do quite a bit. I'm not going to get too in depth with it, but I will give you a little bit about the myriad of things that we do. And first and foremost is we do a lot of education, whether that is through the Boardman River Nature Center, which if you've been, that houses our offices, but also our outdoor attractions, including our native plant garden and our native plant signage. If you haven't been here, that's definitely a feature to check out, very relevant for tonight. We do nature education for youth and for the public. Do programming with, K through 12 school trips, the knee-highs, the three-year-old through 5-year-old, and homeschool drop-off and nature day camps. And then we do nature education for the public as through a myriad of ways, including the native seedling sale that we do yearly and our native plant sale. And so this is part of the reason why we're here today, is to advocate for native plants and why they're so great. And we will be having a native plant sale Saturday, the 21st at 10 a.m. So that will be outdoors as it was last year. So please keep that in mind. But also what we do through education is to answer your questions. That's what conservation districts are here for. So whether if we don't know the answer, we can find you a partner who can answer that question, and we welcome a myriad of topics, which I can go through. So we do quite a bit, as the Boardman River Nature Center might suggest, we do a lot with the Boardman River, and we've been restoring, monitoring, and providing a safe and sustainable access to the Boardman River for over 20 years now. We also have featured here are 4, but we have many more parklands, 3,000 acres, including 20 miles of trails. We also house the MEEP, a MEEP technician, Sam Wolf, and that's for farmers that are thinking in more sustainable terms and can get certified. They're producing agricultural products for our area. And, if you see this sign that's displayed here, then you can know that they are MEEP certified. If you have any questions, contact Sam. We also participate through the Forestry Assistance Program, which Ellie Johnson is our district forester for 3 counties here. She's the person to talk about that. They assist with stewardship of wooded spaces, and people often think of people who log their many, many acres of land, but really no property is too small, and she does site visits as well. And I saved kind of the best for last, just kidding. I'm part of the Northwest Michigan Invasive Species Network, or ISN. We protect, enhance, and promote Northwest Michigan's natural communities through terrestrial invasive plant management, mostly terrestrial, and outreach. GTCD is the fiduciary agent for ISN, but we do more than just within Grand Traverse County. We have a 4-county service area: Benzie, Grand Traverse, Leelanau, and Manistee. So we do treatment, surveys, work bees, anything invasive species related. And then my particular program, Go Beyond Beauty, is kind of relevant to tonight as well. That centers around the disuse of ornamental invasive species in gardens. So a lot of what ISN does, we have ornamental invasives that we're actively working to treat in our natural areas that are still legally sold. So going above and beyond the current Michigan regulations, that's where Go Beyond Beauty comes in, and we partner with nurseries, retailers, landscapers, and really anyone with a garden to, if they choose not to use ornamental invasives in their businesses or in their landscapes, or if they're people making those decisions, we want to recognize them for their business practices, because they're kind of eating into their bottom line potentially by not selling these invasive species. So if you have any questions about that, I'm the person to talk about that. And that's a little snippet of what the district does. And if you want to get involved with the district, you can do all these things. Visit the Nature Center, promote responsible engagement with the outdoors, become a volunteer, participate in our programming. We have a ton of work bees planned for this year, or you can donate as well. And with that, I will pass it off to Cheryl.
Okay. Oops, where's mine? Nope.
As Cheryl gets her presentation uploaded, we just wanted to thank her so much for coming and talking to us about native species, why they're important, and not only highlighting specific species, but also talking about how they fit together within a garden, an ecosystem. And Cheryl is an advanced master gardener and president of Plant It Wild. And we're so grateful that someone so knowledgeable can come talk to us tonight. So just give us 1 second as we get her presentation uploaded. And again, if you have any questions right off the bat, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or any commentary if you know Cheryl.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm on. It's a little getting us switched.
Oh, no, you had it. You're good.
Yeah, there we go. All right, there we are. Hello, everybody. So happy to see you all here tonight. I want to thank the Conservation District for giving me this opportunity to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics, and that is Michigan native plants. Tonight, we're going to be talking about native plants and your landscape. Oh, I'm not advancing.
Just give it a moment.
Nope, it's not. All right, I'm having a little technical difficulty advancing my screen. I've got this up here that I can't get rid of. Yeah, it won't show us. No, it's not a touch screen.
Done right later.
Now we're there. Unmute.
And then we just want to expand it up again.
Oh, I apologize for this. Okay, we've got two topics tonight. The first one is going to be why native plants. And for some of you, you may already understand and get it. Some of you may not really understand the connections. I hope I don't bore those of you who know what's going on. And for those of you who are fully aware of it, take these messages back to your friends and neighbors. And then the second part will be, we're going to start with some definitions. A native plant is one that developed here and has been here, especially in Michigan, since prior to European settlement, which they estimate is around the 1840s, 1850s. A non-native plant is a plant that came from anywhere else around the globe that will grow here. An invasive plant is not a native plant. Some people will say, oh, this harebell is going all over the place. It's invading. Well, a harebell can't invade. It belongs here. It can be an aggressive plant, but it can't invade. The only plants that can invade are those who escape cultivation and are non-native. We get into the cultivar and nativar, which I think is an interesting new word, nativar. A cultivar is a plant that a botanist or horticulturist has manipulated the genes in some way to change a feature. It can be flower color, leaf color, bloom time, bloom size, berry size, any sort of thing that the scientist wishes to alter in that plant. Nativar is what some people have called native plants that they've cultivated to change the characteristics of the plant. We've got problems with that. We'll go into this. When you are shopping for plants, you need to know the Latin name. Every plant has a Latin name. So here I have a picture of what commonly is called a serviceberry. It's either an Amelanchier laevius or an Amelanchier canadensis, and there's lots of them in our toolbox. Common name can be serviceberry or an Allegheny serviceberry or a Juneberry or a smooth shadbush. However, if you get in there and you're looking at the nursery and it has a third name in quotes, like autumn brilliance or Columbianus, can't even pronounce it, Prince Charles, that plant has been changed in some way and is cultivated. Now, the problem with cultivation is that native plants have a relationship with the environment and with the insects and which things that are going on. And it's a very intimate and necessary relationship. We know, for example, if you take a 9-bark and turn the leaf red, the chewing insect, the caterpillar that lives on 9-bark, can no longer digest the leaf. So instead of putting in an important native plant like a 9-bark to enhance your ecosystem, you've actually just shot yourself in the foot. So there are cultivars that are not harmful. The most recent research is that if you get a dwarf version of a plant, it doesn't seem to have any effect at all on the insect relationship. Until we know more, I would stay away. My personal preference is from anything that has been cultivated. There's very little research on individual species in our native plant community to tell us the effect of cultivation on native plants. So Michigan native plants are those which developed here over time. They have a very strong relationship with the soils, the insect wildlife, and the climate. We're now facing climate change, and they're going to be adapting or we're going to lose them. So as much as we can do to support them, the better off we are. So non-native plants are those that did not develop here and have no relationship. And here we have a Bradford pear, and I am as guilty as many people. In the 90s, I put a Bradford pear at my house. They are a disastrous tree. And then we have the Japanese lace leaf maple, which again is such a popular tree. the color, and we'll be talking about red leaves, people value, and it doesn't do anything. A Japanese snowball viburnum. We had these in my backyard when I was a child, and they're sterile. They don't have anything to support nectaring insects or pollinating insects. The firebush, again, so valued. It has such interesting stem structure and has interesting fall color, and it is now become invasive. If you have these plants in your yard, I would suggest you replace them with something more beneficial. Japanese barberry, oh my word, it's everywhere. People love it. It happens to be a tick favorite. It has just that right habitat that ticks like to live inside them. It's not necessarily a host plant for them. They just like it. So people like the purple, like they like the lace leaf maple purple, like they want to turn a 9-bar purple, but it will not be beneficial. Japanese barberry escapes, creates absolute masses in woods, and deters wildlife moving around. Butterfly bush up here in the right-hand corner, because it says butterfly, people are wild about it, and it does attract butterflies for its nectar and pollen. It does not host the life cycle of a butterfly, and so it is not really valuable, and it does escape. Here's a lovely picture of the Grand Traverse Commons with sweet woodruff. Our ground covers that we use from other countries are invasive, non-native, and cannot support insects or contribute to the web of life. And it also chokes out anything that might be there or was once there. Same thing with vinca. I was just looking at some favorite plants of MSU horticulture, and they have all sorts of vinca cultivars that are their favorite plants. And I just cringed. This is what our forest floor should look like and would look like if we could eradicate the sweet woodruff and the vinca. Native plants live in community. These plants all like the same thing. And in this picture, there are wild leeks, also called ramps. There's Dutchman's breeches, and there is trout lily, the yellow ones. These are the plants when you go hiking at Pete's Woods, you go hiking up at Maple Bay, any woods you go into, you will see a collection of the spring ephemerals. And why they're called spring ephemerals is that they disappear. After these bloom, they die away, and you just see leaves on the ground. And so I think a lot of our people who have moved up here from other places, and they come in the summer and they get here in June and they leave in September and they see just woods, they tend to want to plant things in the woods. And that's where they bring in vinca, because they think there's nothing there, where indeed there is a full plant community in that ground. So the question becomes, why do we garden? We garden for aesthetics. We like the way it looks. Fashion. There are trends. Every year, Proven Winners has hot new plants, and you certainly want to be on that bandwagon. Or we garden for history or memories. I mean, I have a hollyhocks over here on the left. I have lilac here in the middle. If your grandma had a plant and you grew up visiting her and seeing that plant, that's the plant you want. But here's the question. Do we also garden for water quality, soil erosion, bugs, birds, and pollinators? And we can still garden for aesthetics. We can still have beauty. At the same time, we can hit all of these high notes. So why does the kind of plant matter? Well, because ecosystems create connections in the web of life. And that's what we want to start doing in our yards. The web of life begins with our soil. Our plants are suited to our soil. I have had people come to my yard and look at my 8-foot tall cup plants and say, wow, what kind of fertilizer do you give these guys? Nothing. We do not need to amend our soil if we do the right plant in the right place. Plants, why do we care about that? because they capture the energy from the sun and turn it into food. And that is the magic that plants do in our ecosystem. And then critters, mostly insects, feed on native plants to exist. Back in the day in the 80s, when I was gardening in Plymouth, and the Plymouth Garden Center, before I knew any better, sold me plants that don't have pests. And if you think of insects as pests, you'll think, oh, that's a really good thing. And because of what I've studied and what I'm doing in native plants, that's just turned over on its head. I want to see chewed leaves. So what are we looking at these pollinators and insects? Drastic declining populations, depending on who you listen to and which is the latest report. We're getting to critical points in some of these. Habitat loss from farming practices, the introduction of genetically modified organisms, GMOs, that allowed widespread use of glyphosate, killed off everything at the margins. I mean, it was sort of, that was the beginning of that monarch decline with the loss of milkweed along the road ditches. Urbanization, suburbanization, alien and introduced plants, and oh yeah, lawn. I'm not sure if you've thought about lawn being a non-native plant, but it is. So the food web is broken by having non-native plants. They'll grow in the soil, they'll grow in the moisture, they'll grow in the climate, but that's all they do, is you just have plants and the food web is done. So why does it matter? Because most insects eat only one kind of plant. The insect-plant relationship has evolved over millennia, long before we started moving plants. And now we move invasive insects here and they destroy our ecosystem because everything's out of balance. That's what happens with the emerald ash borer. Longleaf beetle? Anyway, the Asian longhorn beetle that goes after our maples. The food web that we're looking for is this one. The soil and native plants that insects eat, and then the birds eat them. And that is going to heal and restore the web of life. So insects are the creatures who turn the energy from the sun, processed by plants, into biomass. And here is just a very small selection. I put in the monarchs just because everyone loves them. Birds don't really dine on monarchs because they taste horrible from the milkweed, but other critters will eat monarchs. They are predated by other things. So why does the kind of plant matter? Most baby birds only eat insects. There was a study done in Washington, D.C., where they had bird boxes and they the birds were nesting in them and they found not one bird survived. The nests were full of seeds and there were no insects in the environment to feed the baby birds. Every nest collapsed because this is what baby birds eat. So why does it matter? 95% of baby birds only eat insects. And the best for them are those juicy, squishy caterpillars. They're high in protein, but they'll be fed flies and insects and bees and beetles and anything that mama bird can get her beak on. You wonder what the other 5% eat? Mostly fish. There are water birds. Many insects are pollinators. And guess what? 1/3 of our food requires pollination. And just to stop here for a quick second, here's the value of pollination services, which you can read, but we have honeybees and native bees. And here's the 411 on honeybees. They are managed livestock. They have a farmer that's a beekeeper. They have medical care from vets. They're fed when food is short. They're housed, they're protected. And then we have native bees. And in the state of Michigan, there's between 450 and 475 species of native bees, and they have no one to take care of them. And so as we change our landscapes to have non-producing flowers, we harm the native bees. Studies have shown that when you have a good population of native bees, when you have the crops like cherries or almonds or someplace else being serviced by honeybees, presence of native bees increases the yield. They can work together. We're in environmental trouble, as I'm sure many of you are aware. If you've tuned into this, we have polluted air, polluted water, insect decline, bird decline, climate change, and issues with human health. And all of these things can be helped or improved with native plants. Every one of them. This is where you've got the one brick in the wall. Every person that changes their behavior can change and have an impact on this. So as a result, here we go with grass. We have 40 million acres of turf grass in the United States. It's our largest agricultural crop. And guess what? It's a fashion statement. Years ago, people who had a little bit of property needed food and they gardened that property. It was only the wealthy who could buy food who could put in a lawn. It requires tremendous inputs of water, soil amendments, herbicides, pesticides, chemicals, pollution producing tools for its care. It feeds nothing, absolutely nothing eats it. It may be good for children and dogs, except if it's treated with an herbicide or a pesticide. And of course, these do run into our soils, damaging the soil ecosystem, and run into our water. State of Michigan has prohibited one of the common fertilizers because our soils have enough of it. So the way we garden matters. I found this cute little picture. One lawn's not a problem, but 40 million acres of lawn using 3 billion gallons of gas. That's the problem. So whatever lawn you have, use it strategically. Lawn is an unusual plant that we can walk on it. So use it for paths. Children like to play on it. It's a soft landing spot for them. And it's nice for dogs. So use it strategically for those. Make room for those uses. And then set your mowing height at 4 inches. You know, it'll look long. When you do that, you shade the roots. It requires less water and it prohibits weed seed germination. So longer grass is better for your lawn. Mow less often. I've got a neighbor who comes home early every Friday and mows. I don't even care if it's raining. He's out there on his, sitting lawnmower mowing every week. Eliminate the use of all synthetic fertilizers. Say, that's a synthetic fertilizer. What's an organic fertilizer? Synthetic fertilizers are processed from actually petroleum products and salts, and they feed the plant. And it's like, well, isn't that what we wanted to do? Well, the plant relies on the soil. And what we really want to do is feed the soil. When you just feed the plant, you're like putting it on a drug. Scots, 4 times a year, they're delivering the drugs, the steroids, the whatever they need to keep that plant green and going when it needs it, rather than building the soil. And the result of putting synthetic fertilizer on the soil is that it negatively affects the microorganisms, the bacteria, the fungi, the little things that make the soil healthy. And so you're really creating this, cycle of bad treatment, hurting the soil, making the lawn weak when you use synthetics. Use organic fertilizers. They feed the soil, and the soil in turn feeds the plant. Use caution when considering pesticide usage. Now, there are times, I will admit, that I have used a pesticide when I've had a ground nesting bee right where my kids play. And a ground nesting bee will take a chunk out of them. If I could invite them to move to a new home, I would. But I'm very careful, and only use it when it would be a harm to someone. I let wasps in the roof, peaks of my house. They tried to get in my mailbox. Every few days I'd take my trowel and knock that little nest out because I didn't want them in my mailbox. Oh, one of my other favorite one is know how to turn your irrigation system off. If you have a service that comes and starts you in the spring and blows you out in the fall, they'll set it for July and it'll run, whether it's raining or not. Brian Zimmerman, the landscaper at Four Seasons Nursery, I mean, he just has talked to me and said, how do people not know how to turn these things off? So know when your lawn needs the water and water it when it needs it. It's very convenient to have a system, but when you go to the dial, it's just an off to run. You don't lose your settings. It's not hard, but please, when it rains, turn off your irrigation. And then use electric or battery operated lawn tools. Here is an herbicide, a pesticide, whatever it is, the neonicotinoids. I had to practice to learn that word. I hope you do too. Neonics, as they're affectionately called, are systemic pesticides that are put into plants. They're watered with them. It's sprinkled on the soil. It's on the leaves. It comes from garden centers who are not reputable. And people use them at home. And any chewing insect, any fly that drinks the water off a leaf, any pollinator that goes for the pollen or the nectar will be killed. There's just no two ways about it. It's one of the worst things we have in our environment. There was an anecdotal story a few years ago from Texas that some Home Depot was selling milkweed for monarchs and it had been treated with neonicotinoids. So this is the result. We're in serious decline. We harm ourselves. And it's not that anybody set out to do this. I mean, it's not anybody's fault. The problem is from now moving forward, if the more you know, the better you can do. So we need to turn all of this around. And our plant choices have created inhabitable places. We've allowed invasive species to take hold. I mean, we have so much autumn olive near us that no one even cares. It's just there. And we have plants that the ecosystem doesn't even recognize, and we have lost the benefits provided by nature. Now, here it is. If you let it get into a balance, this is what you get. This is a parasitic control, and it can prevent excessive plant damage. This is a tomato hornworm that showed up on our tomato plants a few years ago. And my husband came running in and said, oh, you've got to see this. And all those little white things that look like rice are wasp eggs, parasitic wasp eggs, and they hatch and they burrow inside and they keep that tomato hornworm alive until they're done eating it. But it's just paralyzed and it can't damage our plant any longer. And there you go. We didn't have to use a chemical. We just invited wasps. Critters are very picky eaters. I mean, if you think if you're a parent and you had a kid that was picky, nothing like these. A milkweed tussock moth over here on the left eats only milkweed. People freak out when they see it. It skeletonizes the leaf and they think they're doing something harmful. Well, no, they belong there. Down at the bottom, we got the brown hooded owlet moth that lives on aster. It just chews up aster leaves. The dogwood sawfly larva, we've had an infestation over the past couple of years, and oh my goodness, our pagoda dogwood was absolutely stripped of leaves. Did not kill it. The next year we had another infestation, and last year we had a couple. And so if we let the cycle happen, we can go without poisoning the environment. Now our little yellow woolly bear is not a picky eater. It'll eat just about anything. Painted lady butterfly likes pussy toes and a couple other plants. if you notice the healthy leaves and then the leaves that they have had the eggs on, they make kind of a webbing. And I don't mind. I don't look at those as ugly leaves. They're fine leaves. And of course, we have to show monarchs. So how have we gotten here? Well, we treat our property as separate from nature. We live in a house, we do what we want in our house. In our yard, we do what we want in our yard. We see nature as something separate that we go to. On weekends, we go and take hikes. We go to the beach. We ride bikes and we look at things. And if we see a snake out there, we're fine. Like, oh, look, we saw a snake. You see a snake at home and you say, get out the hole. No. It's not separate from us. We want to live in it. I live in a 42 lot subdivision. It has acre lots and most of it's lawn. It's a statement of affluence that you can live on an acre and keep it in grass. Okay, we're going to take a little pause there. See what questions that we have, because I'm going to switch to landscaping.
I think we've answered all the questions
We've answered
in the chat, but there was no, I think we answered all the questions in the chat. There was a great question about, I planted all these native plants in my yard, but neighbors think it looks a little unruly.
Yes.
So I answered that using cues for care, such as paths or borders, even natural borders.
Right.
And then also having signage. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, we will be covering that in the landscaping
Beautiful.
section.
Beautiful.
So yes, people do wonder what's going on when you start changing.
Yes.
And we've had experience with that, and we can share how we went about doing it.
Yep. And then one more question was, can non-native plants be more attractive to native pollinators than native plants? I did respond to that one individually, and I said that although they can equally attract pollinators, it kind of stops it there and it doesn't continue the life cycle.
Right, it doesn't continue the life cycle. And one of my most hated things on Facebook in spring is to leave the dandelions because the bees love dandelions. Well, dandelions only have about 40% of the nutrition in the pollen and nectar, whatever it's got, I don't know which it has, that native plants do. And so, sure, if you're seeing lots of bees on your dandelions, it's because you have nothing else for them to eat. Any others?
And there's an invasive species question that I will
You'll take
answer
care of
personally.
Okay.
So I think we're good with that, and you're doing good on time.
Yeah, I think we're really good on time.
Yeah, really good.
Yep. So here we go. This one's going to be a little bit longer. I hope I'm not talking too fast. I tend to, I have a lot I want to share, and so I just go with it. So we're going to talk about landscaping. How do we use these plants? How do we create the beautiful places that have benefits for the ecosystem? It's our responsibility then, now that we've learned all we learned before, to landscape with beautiful and beneficial Michigan native plants and to maintain the ecosystem with a do no harm philosophy. We will do no harm anymore. We're going to stop all that. So I've got 3 books here, and if you have not read them, I highly encourage you to. Bringing Nature Home by Douglas Tallamy, who's a PhD entomologist at the University of Delaware, published this book in 2007. And it was our first really clear linkage of the science. Lots of people, especially birders, had that anecdotal feeling that native plants mattered. And Doug was the first one that did it. His second book, Nature's Best Hope, is here. He is a big promoter of oaks because they host the most of the species of caterpillars that birds need. And so his third book is on oaks. I haven't read it yet. Actually, I plan to pick it up tomorrow. It's been out a short while. And then I read Half Earth by Edward O. Wilson. And by reading this book, I kind of went back and got to know a little more. He just recently passed. A fantastic guy. His PhD was, I think, on ants. And he left entomology and actually was the one that coined the term ecologist. Fascinating. Ptolemy says we need 70% of our landscaping to be native in order to have any hope of bringing back the ecosystem. Edward O. Wilson says we need 50% of the earth to be native. That's a really tall order when we look at where we are now and the destruction that's being done. And so that's where we start in our homes, in our backyard. Doug Ptolemy has partnered with the National Wildlife Federation, and he has a homegrown national park program. You know, what do you see in parks that you like? Bring that home and make your yard a park. So the goals of native landscaping is to experience nature where we live. You should be able to walk out your door and see bugs, see critters, see everything. Of course, we don't want the deer to eat our plants, but that's an entirely different topic here. We want to increase the insect biomass to feed birds. And in our yard, we have more birds. We work really hard to do no harm and to encourage them to be there. We want to increase the pollinators to feed us. One of my husband's and my favorite summer plants is the Hypericum calms. And in August, in late July and August when it's blooming, bumblebees are just all over that sucker. It just vibrates with them. And so at the end of a day of gardening, to sit out on our porch and drink our wine and listen to the bees hum is just terribly entertaining. I mean, maybe that says more about my life than anything else, but it feels good. We need to increase the pollinators. We want more wasps, more bees, more bats, more hummingbirds, more beetles, everything. We want more of it. We want our bird populations to recover. And we want to decrease surface and groundwater pollutants. Anywhere in Michigan, what is it? You're only 63 miles from water. You certainly want to protect that surface water, and our current practices do not. And you can decrease your personal contribution to air pollution by stopping using electric mowers. Certainly electric, leaf blowers? Oh, they're just an awful thing. But another conversation. So here's E.O. Wilson's native plants host the little critters that run the world. All your life you've been told these are bugs, but they're not. They're bird food. Now they do have a worm on here, and I sort of take exception to that worm. I don't know how many of you are aware that earthworms are not native in the state of Michigan. Their native range stops somewhere around Kentucky with the Ice Age. And so every worm that we have here was brought here by humans. It came in the roots of plants, or it came up as fish bait. And some of the worms are becoming actually problematic in northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin, where they're actually killing forests. Fishermen who are done with their night crawlers or their red wigglers dump their bait thinking, oh, they belong here, it's fine. And they're eating so much leaf litter off the floor that they're starving the trees. So here is a picture of your typical suburban landscape with turf lawns, and they're not an ecosystem and cannot support life. We have bright green grass that is well fed with synthetic fertilizer. And we have these shrubs and trees and things that, you know, maybe there's a sedum in there, but I don't think that's a real popular plant for pollinators. And this is what we look like. So how do you begin? Because I really want this to be, what steps are you going to take in your yard? Go out in it and assess it. How much turf grass do you have? Because that's going to be the easiest thing to alter. How much of it? How much do you really need? You don't need it all. I can guarantee you that. And then how little can you really get away with? And so that is the first thing, is go out and assess your yard. So this was the house that we bought in Traverse City in April of 2015. It has a red maple in it. It has 2 red maples. One is on the other side of the driveway. It has 3 of these spire conifers of some sort, and everything else was non-native. And if you notice, there's a lot of grass. So we decided we wanted lawn for our dog. But we need enough space for our dog to run and have a good time. We were going to use lawns for paths because you can walk on them. We wanted lawn for piling snow along the drive and the road, because when we get heavy snowfall, we're up high, we're west of Traverse City, off of Cedar Run, and we get more snow than downtown gets. And I didn't want to have to worry. I could have just put all perennials along there and not worry if they got crushed, but I thought, oh, we'll just use the lawn for that. We left lawn over the septic tank. And that is so that there's access to it to be cleaned out. And then here answers one of the questions that one of the listeners asked. We left enough lawn to communicate with the neighborhood. So they knew that we weren't throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We wanted to be appropriate enough. I'm already the nutty plant lady. I didn't want to be the hated nutty plant lady. So I just took this picture on Monday. So we have added now 11 landscape beds, each with a separate purpose and personality. We have taken out a copious amount of lawn. We have a great deal of habitat community. I don't know if you noticed the first picture I had up, there was a possum walking through the wet bed. And we had 3 of them hanging around this year. I named them Awesome, Blossom, and Big Guy. And so they walk through our wet area and hang out, and it's perfectly all right. Because as much as a Japanese barberry is a tick host, the possum is your tick exterminator. They're really good to have around. So assess your landscape. What plants must go? If you've got anything invasive there, get rid of it. I believe ISN will have their barberry trade-up day coming this spring. If you've got Japanese barberry, they will give you a coupon that you can spend towards a replacement plant. Evaluate each non-native plant and keep only those you absolutely, positively love. You don't have to be 100% native. I'm not. My dad loved ginkgos. He died 12 years ago. I have a ginkgo for my dad. And that's okay. But I know that's what I've done. And I certainly have added a lot more diversity to make up for that blank. Nobody's going to mess with, eat a ginkgo. So to reach our goal, at least 70% should be native, including the lawn. That's a lot of native if you're going to keep much lawn. So we removed all of our foundation landscaping. It was a mixture of spirea, not native, daylilies, I hate those things, Japanese barberry, and Japanese lace leaf maple. My husband wasn't sure he wanted to get rid of the lace leaf maple, so we left it through the first year. And after we got done landscaping with natives, he looked at it and said, "You're right, it has to go." And so we removed it as well. It's a valuable plant at the nursery, and it was, I felt badly about doing that, but it's a blank. Additionally, we have continued to remove Japanese honeysuckle and autumn olive from the woods that surround the back of our house. So we fight invasives on a regular basis. So when you're prepping your planting beds, here's your how-do. You've got to remove existing plant material, and how are you going to do that? If it's shrubs, you can dig it. If it is grass or perennials, you can treat with herbicide. You can solarize it, which is taking heavy grade black plastic, tacking it down and leaving it from over the summer. So you actually fry what's there on the ground. You hope for lots of sun. Or you can smother it with a combination of newspapers, cardboards, and mulch. So if you start at the top middle, that is a juniper bed at the Presbyterian Church in Traverse City. And that was selected as a sacred grounds site when we got a grant from the National Wildlife Federation to install a native pollinator garden. And then the second picture on the left is what it looked like once we got it cleared. It was a very big job and it was a lot of hard work to get those out of there. We did it all manually and got them out. It's about 1,200 square feet. And then the second, the middle on the left is where we used glyphosate. At the bottom, we moved so many plants from our previous house that we needed to get them in the ground really quick and did not have time to do smothering, which is what I prefer. And this bed is on a steep slope. It doesn't look as steep in this picture, but there's no way we were going to mow that. And so we used glyphosate and then we moved these plants in. The little teeny green thing in the middle is actually a white pine that's about a foot tall. And you'll get to meet that plant again because this was 2015. And then in the bottom, that is the last bed we did, and I smothered it. And what we do to do that is we edge it, cut out the section. I throw all the sod in the middle, put down layers of either cardboard or about 5 sheets of newspaper, and then put at least 3 inches of pine bark mulch and leave it for a season. So I did this in May, and we'll see later what it looked like and when I put things in September. So the other thing you can do is consider expanding your foundation landscape beds. Some landscape beds in the fronts of houses are very shallow. They're not, deep at all. You can easily pull those out another 5 feet at least, and then design your beds to have lower plants and higher plants. You could add trees, you could add things. And that's just a pretty simple way to not mess with a lot of other things if you have a small lot. And then finally, you can locate additional beds. Design, do include your house and your house windows, the number of beds you want, the use of your property. What do you have going for you? And then locate beds there. And I will talk about the diversity of the beds we have as we go along. Preparation, by the way, is the number one thing. If you don't get rid of the stuff and you try to plant in there, you will have a nightmare the rest of your life. Preparation is key to getting a nice landscape when you're done. So in our case, we added several beds. We left the foundation bed shaped as it was. It was a reasonably decent size, and we removed all the existing plants, save the Japanese lace leaf maple, which we removed the next year. We added a shrub and tree bed on a steep slope. That was the beginning of the one you just saw. We added a bed near the street, which unbeknownst to us became a wet bed. We're on a clay drumlin and water just sits there on that clay. And so my planting choices and my design changed dramatically once I figured out how wet it was. My husband said, "Oh my goodness, look at the water is here, we're up to ankles in water. What are we going to do?" And I said, "We've got plans for that." We added a pollinator bed right in front of the front bedroom for viewing opportunities. There's so much activity. It's great fun, all growing season long. And then we added a bed between the wet and pollinator bed, which is an additional shrub and tree bed. And by having all of these different types of beds, it doesn't look quite as chaotic, I think. To me, a pollinator bed is typically the most chaotic of the native beds. Here's how we communicated to the neighborhood. I had a sign made. We bought the house and we were living along Lake Michigan until it was sold. And so we didn't live in our house for that first season. And I had this sign made and I put it out in front so that Our neighbors knew that when our grass was dying, when we had piles of mulch, when, you know, we were busy doing all of these crazy things to our yard, that it was intentional. I have used this sign more than once. I've lent it to people doing projects when they said, how do I tell people what I'm doing? It's like, well, here you go, make a sign. When we were on the Friendly Garden Club walk in 18, my daughter did a kind of this overhead view to illustrate our, at that time, 10 different beds. And the 11th bed has come in since then. So you can see how the lawn was chopped up and made into paths. So landscape bed analysis and plant choices. We have a large palette of plants from which to choose. And to support insect biomass, pollinators and birds think beyond perennial forbs or wildflowers. I mean, forbs are flowers, they're the perennials. I find that native plant beds that have trees and shrubs as part of their design are more pleasing to me. They look good all season long. I put in a perennial bed when I lived in Pittsburgh, and it was just off our patio, and it was, you know, mounded and wonderful in summer, and in winter it was nothing. It was just flat, and we didn't get a whole lot of snow to pile up. It was just flat, and it was depressing. So now I've decided all of my beds will have some form of structure, except of course a pocket meadow, which will not have any structure in it. So you can put it anywhere in your yard. If you've got shade, there are plants for that. You can find shade plants that like to live whether it's dry or wet. If you've got compacted soils, there are plants that just strive to be clay busters that want to open up. And the roots of native plants can handle just about anything. I've got sand and gravel, which a lot of Michiganders have sand and gravel. There are dunes plants, there are sand and gravel plants. They will be perfectly happy in your yard. I do not advocate soil amendment at all. I do not bring in topsoil. I do not, you know, add stuff other than to my vegetable garden and my lawn. When I talked about organic fertilizers, that was really for your lawn. That was not for these landscape beds. We don't add to these. And you got a wet spot like we uncovered after we bought our house. We got plants that like it with wet feet. So let's start with your plant choices. Can you include a canopy tree? These trees are large. I would place them on a west side of the house, not close to the house. You want to have it grow so it shades your house, saves energy, cools your property. And there are so many to choose from. Oaks, they're the rock star of supporting caterpillars. Maples, sycamore, tulip, beech, yellow birch, ironwood, paper birch, basswood, all of these would just be lovely added to a yard. And can you include conifers? We've got cedars, balsam fir, white spruce, tamaracks, or some people call them larches, and pines. They really add to bird protection. And how about a small tree? The serviceberry that I showed you, a redbud, I think I showed you that, or I will, a hop tree or bladdernut. These are not widely used at this point, but I have gotten them from native plant sales and been able to, you know, add them to my garden, and I'm watching them grow. And there's several varieties of dogwood. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that Cornus family, but the dogwoods. There are trees, they're all small, silky, gray, pagoda, flowering, to name a few. There's the red twig dogwood, which is the shrub form, and there's actually a dogwood ground cover called bunchberry. They all have the very similar characteristic of deeply veined leaves. And then you get to your shrubs. And I have absolutely fallen in love with our native shrubs, the hypericum that the bees love, the viburnums. We have several to choose from, the high bush cranberry, the nannyberry, maple leaf, just lots of them, sumac, staghorns, I wasn't really a fan of staghorn sumac in the past, but I have come to appreciate it. But I like the aromatic sumac, especially for steep slopes. Potentilla, man, that's a tough plant. If you've got something near where salt runs off your road, potentilla will put up with it. Witch hazel has a fascinating bloom. It blooms late, like October, November, and it's bright yellow. The northern bush honeysuckle, a suckering plant, but I'll show you some pictures. Its fall color when it gets full sun is red. It's to die for. Red twig dogwood, so spectacular when it's snowy with those red stems. Pussy willow is one of my earliest bloomers. I've got them actually starting to break their buds now. That and red maple are where I first find my pollinators. Michigan holly, if you've got a wet area, the orange berries through winter are gorgeous. Elderberry, a nice structure and can take shade. Hazelnut, and on and on and on. And of course, all of the forbs, the flowers and perennials. And there are sedges and ferns. If you're not familiar with sedges, some of them look a lot like grass and can be used as a grass alternative in areas that don't get much traffic, or as your grass is not doing well because it's too shady. Pennsylvania sedge is beautiful. You don't have to mow it. You don't have to do anything to it. And it likes it just that partial shade. And ferns. And so there are just enough plants for your design choices that if everybody on your street landscape with natives, you don't have to look alike. So we have had the following trees. We had the original 2 red maples, and our sides and back are white pine maple woods. And we have found an American elm. It's a baby right now. Yellow birch, river birch, ironwood, blue beech, black cherry, several of those. Because we had some originally on the property that have passed, and then a tulip poplar. We have also added the white pine that I brought when it was brought to my house when it was a foot tall, a balsam fir, an eastern hemlock, 2 of those, white spruce, 4 of those, white cedar, many of those, and tamarack. Serviceberry, red bud, hop tree, bladdernut, and pagoda dogwood. So that's a lot of trees to add. Treed. And why does it matter? Nesting sites, nectar and pollen and seeds, they sequester carbon, shade the earth and your house. They host caterpillars, they house and host all manners of critters, and they increase your home value. A house with large trees is more valuable to a buyer. They may not know that, but it is one of those things people have figured out. Conifers provide shelters initial installation. She kind of was looking at my front edge and she said, "You've got all those conifers all along that front." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Pretty soon you won't see the street." And I thought, you think that wasn't planned? Yeah. Then we can sit on our porch and drink our wine and not see the people walking by. Small trees, again, so important for landscape structure. Pollen, nectar, seeds, host caterpillars, they do all of that, but a tree in a flower bed is a rock star. And then the same with shrubs, provide landscape structure, pollen, nectar, seeds, and host caterpillars. I use our suckering shrubs on steep slopes to stabilize them. It's like they want a sucker. Diversity, diversity, diversity. Bloom time, mean across the flowering season, as early as you can get until October. And if you do have the hazelnut, you will, or the witch hazel, you will actually bloom into November. Flower shape. These critters all have different kinds of mouths. You've got long-tongued bees and butterflies. You've got bees that need to get inside and they vibrate to get the pollen on them. All sorts of shape. If you're doing hummingbirds, they need tubular. And so think of that when you're picking your flowers. When do they bloom? How do they look? As well as color. And diversity in host plants. There are now several sources available that weren't before that will tell you what caterpillars need. If you're looking at an ID book, it's always the pictures of the butterfly or the moth, never of the caterpillar, but there are good books on caterpillars out there. And I encourage you to look at that. Heather Holm has one, Pollinators of Native Plants, where she talks about host plants for certain types of caterpillars. So that is available. It does take a little more time to figure all that out, but you'll get it. Now, here's a key native landscaping concept. I got this from Claudia Weist and Thomas Rainier in Post-Wild Planting. And it's plants want to cover the ground. They really do. You have a choice. Do you want weeds or do you want beneficial plants? So here's the traditional landscaping aesthetic. Does anything jump out at you to say, there's a whole lot of something here? And I'd say it's mulch. These places look like they are growing mulch. And I guarantee you, they're going to have to weed it. Now, if somebody professionally installed this, I bet they put landscape cloth under all of it saying, okay, weed free. We'll put landscape cloth, punch a hole, put the plant in, put the mulch over it. You're done. What do you think happens to that organic material in 2 to 3 years? It tracks all sorts of seeds. The roots break through, and now you're weeding through landscape cloth. I've removed more of that crap that I like to think about. It's just a bane. I would never use landscape cloth. What I would do is look at native landscape aesthetics and let the plants cover the ground. I have 2 beds so far that I have landscaped very densely, and it's amazing. 20 minutes, 2 times, 3 times this summer, and I'm done. I'll get a clover here, I'll get something there. And it's just not a big deal because this is what we're looking at. Plants want to cover the ground. Also, if you look at these, and we'll be talking about that later, they start out low by the path and then your taller plants to the back. And so take an eye, you see, oh, they're down there, that one at the corner. There's still some, mulch around, but there's so much less than here. We actually have plants covering the ground. So your design consideration, put low on edges and height to the back or the middle. If it's a round bed, you put your height in the middle. If it backs up to something, you put your height at the back. And when we're talking about native plant height, you can get 8-foot flower plants. Cup plant will get that tall. Indian plantain will probably get 6 feet tall. If you're using a really small oval, I wouldn't use those plants. I would wait till I had a larger scale. I had a strong backdrop that I could put those on. So we don't want it to look out of, awkward. We can design this so it really is beautiful. There's 2 kind of approaches to a wildflower garden. You've got the scatter approach where people want to just say, oh, I'm gonna put my wildflower seeds out and see what happens. Or I'm gonna put, butterfly weed here and another butterfly weed here and another butterfly weed here. And my suggestion would be to group your plants, put as many of them in one place as you can. It doesn't have to be a shape, it doesn't have to be a strip or a square or a circle. They can blend into other plants, but most people's thinking is that a larger collection in one place is more pleasing to the eye. And it's also easier for insects. Once they find you, they've got a lot of stuff to go through to eat and to find. And then what will it look like from November to June? Can you include plants for winter interest or for season interest? And that was my problem in Pittsburgh. I just had flowers that bloomed across the season and it was really pretty. But man, from November to June, it was depressing. So here you go. This is what we did. This was our front wet bed in 2015. You can see the sign there, Left for Neighbors. And we started installing plants. And then we have a plant list on the side. All of these plants do not mind wet feet. We did plant a tamarack. You can kind of see it there in the middle. It's just gray in this picture. And it did not survive. It was actually too wet. And so my tamarack, after I pulled it out of the ground and was very sad, I have moved it up towards an edge on a higher spot. And what I had to do then was to go through and actually make a small riverbed in the middle of this and have higher sides so that when the water sat, it kind of had a little trench to go into. And boy, the birds love it. Everybody loves coming to the wet bed. And this is the wet bed a few years later. And this would be the end of the season. You can tell by what the plants look like. Cardinal flower is an end of the season plant. The goldenrod is end of the season. The Indian grass that's up tall there with those big seed heads are turning brown. I like to include grasses in all of my beds. They're good fillers. They attract all sorts of certain wildlife. In the picture on the left, if you look very carefully, you can kind of see the black seed heads of white indigo. On the one on the right, the shrub that's kind of on the right side in the middle is the red twig dogwood. There are about 3 dogwoods in that bed. And here's a few more pictures of it. That bottom right is a bottle gentian. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one. It does like it to be a bit damp. And it has these absolutely completely closed blossoms. But there is a bumblebee, a muscular bee, that will actually open that up and go inside and be closed in. And it has a little escape hatch at the bottom, but the purple on that is just glorious in the garden. Here's the wet bed as it's growing up. This was 2020. Again, you can tell the time of year. This is spring because down here on the left side, we have Canada anemone blooming. And if you watch very carefully in kind of the front, about the 2/3 of the way towards the right, you can see the blossom of the indigo. The large shrub that's on the left then is pussy willow. And here you can see the tamarack that got moved from the center out to the side. So here's the picture we saw before about glyphosate and the tree and shrub bed. We have a blue spruce in this picture. It is not a native. It will eventually, I'm sure, get needle cast, but it was given to me by a neighbor when I was moving and was the size of a pencil. I couldn't leave it behind, and so it got moved. And here's that bed in 2020. That white pine that was a foot tall is now the tallest tree there. The lower shrub in front is bearberry. It is a dunes plant. You will find it on the dunes. It grows in full sun and partial shade in sand. It's a hardy little guy. It has little tiny bear's ears leaves that are evergreen. It gets a little pink flower. It has red berries. They're expensive. I put 5 of them in here and said, it's clay. I hope they make it. And by gum, they have spread and they are the primary ground cover. In this bed is the aromatic sumac. In the back, if you look back by my son's truck in this picture, the little things standing up, those are pussy toes blooming. So that'll tell you again the time of the year. This is a spring picture. And I put a big group of little blue stem as filler on the far side of this bed because I had left some grass there and we looked at ourselves and said, who's going to mow that strip? And so I filled it with little blue stem. And at the upper left, you can see the sumac that's blending in, and in the middle, you can see some of the bearberry. And I'm trying to get these plants to cover the ground. This is one of those beds that I don't have to weed very much because the planting is so dense. So here's the pollinator bed. And here you can get a glimpse at the foundation bed with the first year, because that Japanese lace leaf maple is still there. And this is what made an irregular shape. We have a path between the two beds. You see the shadow of the maple tree. And I have several pictures of it. This was at the end of the season. You can tell because the pumpkin is out and the plant list. Lots and lots of diversity here. These are all full sun, happy plants. After the lawn had been in-ground irrigation that watered everything. And after about 2 years, we had them come out and redirect. The water now is just on the lawn and not on the landscape beds. And so we don't have to worry about them getting too much water or anything else because the lawn needs it. These guys don't. Here, this is that same bed, and you can tell by what's blooming by the time of the year by what's blooming. This is Ohio spiderwort and coreopsis, and there's a little bit of beard tongue there in the back. So this starts blooming and continues. My harebell starts kind of in the middle of June and will actually keep blooming until November. It's my latest. This is midsummer, where you get the liatris, coneflowers. Hoary vervain is in the distance. And on the far right, that tall thing that goes up out of the way, that is the cup plant that gets 8 feet tall. Cup plants are very interesting. They're named cup plants because their leaves meet their stem and form a cup. And when it rains, those cups fill up with water, and birds and insects will drink from them until they dry up. Again, another one that you can see what's happening. This would be end of summer because the cup plant way at the back is starting to bloom. There's yellow coneflower, the monarda's blooming, the harebell is down on the left side, the purple down in the front is wild petunia, the vervain is still blooming on the far side, and it's a happy, happy bed. This was again early on from a distance. You can see the structure with the large shrubs and trees. And so when it's done, we still have it. Now this is the bed right in the middle. It was just too much grass. We had to take it out and say, okay, what are we going to do right here in the middle? And that's the maple tree that was already there. And then we added the rest of the trees and shrubs. And it took a ton of mulch. Absolutely a ton. It took me hours to haul buckets to. And so I said, I need something. And I asked Four Season Nursery to get me a flat of Potentilla simplex. As I mentioned about the dogwood having different forms, Potentilla is a shrub. It is also a ground cover or a vine. And I got a 38 plug flat and plugged them in. And so 2 years later, this is what that bed looks like. I think that's pretty dramatic. And I don't have to weed that much. I really like the Potentilla has covered the ground for me. And then the bonus, which I didn't realize when I planted it, was what it looks like in fall. And I think you've got some pretty nice fall color going on in this landscape bed. The reddish tree right in front is a serviceberry. They get that nice peachy reddish color. The yellow one on the right is the non-native ginkgo. Spice bush are in there. Lots of other things. The one on the left is the yellow birch. So a steep slope. We had this slope to one side of a yard, and there was nothing on it but grass you couldn't cut and weeds that would grow up in there. And so we just put in suckering shrubs. And we put in hazelnut and northern bush honeysuckle and nannyberry viburnum. This was in 18. I can tell because of the plant tags from the garden walk. And then in the fall, look at that color that you get from the northern bush honeysuckle when it gets some sun. It's just gorgeous. And so the yard, all of these bloom, they all get pollinators on them. And I'm hoping in a few more years, they will just take over all that grass. I'm not going to mess with them. We're just going to make sure they're happy. We put in a rain garden in 2018. We had a problem, and our house is a 1-story on the front, and it opens up to a 2-story on the back, and there's a deck up above. And down at the patio that's under the deck, we had standing water at certain times of years. And with climate change, we are getting heavier rainfall, and my husband is worried about that rain coming in that sliding door and getting in our lower level. And so we looked at each other and said, we've got plans for that. And so we had a landscape designer, Brian Zimmerman, come out and install this rain garden. And our roof runoff were changed to go out into the yard and then flow down into this bed. There is a drain actually in the bed that comes up from underground from another area where we have French drains, you know, those tubes that collect water and will move it away. So we have French drains feeding into here. We have runoff feeding into here. And we moved the wet spot just a little further away from our lower level. We also did replace the patio because it had no grade. It was totally flat. And the most we could get was a 2% grade, but we figured that was better than nothing. And now we have no standing water anywhere. And what's in here are rain garden plants that will stand with their feet wet and not mind being dried out. And so in the picture on the left, the middle tree is a button, or the middle shrub is a button bush. And the one on the right, it is a native spirea. What else is in there? I think I have a plant list. Anyway, here's the rain garden grown in. And these pictures were taken in the spring, 2 years after it was planted. You can see the blue flag iris in the one on the left, and you can see the Canada anemone in the one on the right. This just happens to also attract monarchs. At the far end, the one where the goes into the dry bed, the overflow, we have swamp milkweed, and that is just where we have had so many monarchs, and then they have their chrysalis on the structures in that bed. So it's been a really interesting place. All the thick stuff on the outside of the left picture is fox sedge. I put in the sedge because I needed something to slow the water as it ran down. I'm just experimenting with sedges now and deciding how much I like them and where I like using them. But this bed fills with water. It runs over into the dry bed, but it also keeps a lot of water out of our neighbor's backyard, which is downhill from us. So we feel like we've taken some pretty positive moves to protect our property from being flooded in our lower level and protecting our neighbor's property from getting too much water from us. And here is the rain garden plant list. Oh yes, I put Michigan holly in there. Michigan holly is one of those that needs a boy and a girl. If you buy them from the conservation district, you'll get 10 of them and you have no idea their sex. They need to grow up a while, go through puberty until they're ready. And I put them in pots and overwinter them until they get big enough to bloom, and I know who they are so I can mix them up. But the cardinal flower is just such a nice pop of color in the summertime. The late summer is when it comes. Are we getting any questions, guys?
I'm answering some in the chat. We're just leaving
Okay.
some for that.
Okay. At the edge of our woods at the back, the lawn just went up to the woods. So this was a really easy way to just pull out that grass, and I just smothered it. It was not hard because it was weak being in the shady area. and I made a woodland edge bed. The plant right in front of the white pine that you see that looks fairly large, and then there's one on the left, is spikenard, Aurelia racemosa, one of my absolute favorite plants in the whole wide world. Oh, they all are, but anyway, I really like spikenard. And they grow up from nothing, and they can be 5 feet tall, and they get a big cluster of white flowers that kind of looks like a lilac. It's kind of that clustery kind of flower, and they'll get them all over the place. And then they'll turn into little tiny purple berries, and I'll notice them and I'll say, oh, look, they've gone to fruit, and then they're gone. So someone is really enjoying my spikenard. It does very well in shade. And then there's golden Alexander, wild geranium, yellow avens. Yellow avens, for those of you who know what prairie smoke is, it's the shade cousin. So it has a similar like leaf, different flower completely, but it is related. Violets, by the way, are really good host plants for lots of butterflies. And I tried looking for them. And so far as I can find, no one is growing them, propagating, collecting seeds. So if you see someone, you know, the common blue, people are like, wah, wah, who wants a common blue? But the Canada violets are white, and the downy yellow are yellow, and they don't spread. They're not as aggressive spreaders, and they're just nice to have around for what they provide. Now, what you can't see in this picture is if you go in partial way through this woods, there is a path, and we have installed an ephemeral garden. We have 3 kinds of trillium, the red, the yellow, and the white. I have Dutchman's breeches, squirrel corn, leeks, let's see, Virginia bluebells, a lot of the ephemerals. The bloodroot is back there. And so early in the spring, I've been out looking. I had found one bloodroot that was 1 inch tall on Monday. And I have other beds that are shade beds and have ephemerals on the other side of the house that I'm not showing you today. And I do have hepatica in bloom as of Tuesday. So that was pretty exciting. Here's the pocket meadow. This is the latest one. This is the one we smothered. It is actually over our septic field, which is why we'll not have trees or shrubs in this bed. It also is our only access to our backyard. The other side has stone steps because we've got this slope. And so you couldn't get back there. So I need something that can be run over and will not be harmed. So from the street, tree trimming, septic, anything can get in to do what they need to do and run over this. So it was designed to be run over if it needed to be, but it gets rid of the lawn, which is what I really wanted to do. And if you kind of look over here on the left or the right side, you can see it really kind of is in that base of that steep slope. So smothered it and then planted right through the cardboard, right through the newspaper. Most of it was gone. There wasn't much there to do. And I was just able to put plugs in. I am a fan of plugs. They are, for me, the most cost effective. You can get them from various sources. These mostly came, I think, from Bird's Foot Native Plant Nursery in South Boardman. He is not a retail operation. He's a wholesaler. But if you're going to buy a lot of plants, like this collection where several flats, he'll sell those to you as if he were retail. But it's not someplace you can go and look at plants. So the landscape bed structure includes woody plants and stems, winter interests, red berries, peeling bark, and habitat. And in our yard, winter is an important time to not clean up your yard. There are people who in fall want to get everything cleaned up. And hopefully you've heard leave the leaves. The woolly bear caterpillars overwinter as caterpillars. They don't go into the leaves and form a chrysalis. They stay there as caterpillars and hibernate. And so in the spring, when you start seeing woolly bears moving again, they will go into a chrysalis form later, but they will come out as caterpillars, and they haven't gone through any process. Our morning cloak butterfly is one of the first ones we see. We had one in our garage, of all things, on Tuesday. They overwinter as adults. If you're in an area, a nature place, and you're walking and there is no flower blooming for them, they come out as soon as the temperature is 50 degrees and it maintains that 50 degree. They will eat dung. And so they start on feces from deer or rabbits or dogs. And that's how they sustain themselves until their flowers come out. We have many, many caterpillars that go into their pupa form and overwinter. One of the most beautiful and famous ones is the Luna moth, and their chrysalis looks like a leaf. And so we need to leave this in our landscapes for them to use as habitat in the winter. So we need to think not just of the flowers and the nectar, but also housing for them. Many other critters, I don't even have a full list because I don't even know them. In the spring, the same thing. I hope none of you have gone out and disturbed anything. Don't. My next door neighbor was out raking our lawn yesterday. And I wanted to scream over at her, knock it off, go do something else, wash windows, do anything but mess with your landscape. Wait until it's consistently 50 degrees. Now, when I buy plants from the Conservancy, I buy the little sticks, and I have learned to overwinter them in pots. When I collected this for an earlier presentation, of course, I was doing it in winter. So this is what they look like in my little nursery. And there they are. We have this little nursery. We use posts and fishing wire to keep the deer browse out. And there's our little nursery with our trees from the seedling sales. And then here's what they look like as they grow up and where I have installed them. A black cherry, a tamarack. Behind that, you see a red twig dogwood. This is a tulip poplar. And that is one of the most beautiful sycamores I have ever seen. And I got that as a stick. This is on a property that is in our neighborhood that my husband and I are rehabilitating. And so we get a lot of plants and give them to this property. This white spruce that is now grown up in our yard, as you can see, it's gotten much bigger. These two that are the anchors of that shrub and tree bed started out as sticks from the seedling sale. Red osier dogwood, service berries, all of these came from seedling sales. And we found that if we nurseryed them, put them in pots, put the pots in the ground and left them for a period of time, year or two, we had really successful, vibrant plants. When we lived in Frankfurt, we would try to buy them and just put them in the woods. And it was just way too hard to find them, water them, take care of them. We would get probably 50% loss then. And now we have very low. Almost everything survives when we baby it. Again, the white spruce, and then those are the white cedars along the front of the house, which will be our green fence. It will be our privacy. Here's a high bush cranberry. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think about those red berries? That plant is so bitter that the birds do not eat it in the fall. And after it goes through the freeze and it ferments, there are birds, especially cedar waxwings, that will come back and feast on that after their migration. And so we can't wait. This is in the pollinator bed in our front lawn. So adding trees and beds extends the flowering season, especially in spring. And here's just some quick pictures to look at. This is the hypericum that the bumbles love. This is 9-bark and what its leaves and bark looks like. High bush cranberry, if you look at those big white petals, flowers on the outside edge are not their flowers. It's the little tiny things there in the middle that are actually the flowers that the insects need. This is the bearberry with their little leaves, their little tiny pink flowers, and they will have red berries. Red bud, certainly fantastic. It's one of those plants that blooms first thing in spring and its leaves come later. Their leaves are large heart-shaped leaves, and they're just lovely. That replaced that Japanese maple. To give you a feel of how successful these native plants are, this was that sacred grounds that we pulled out all those junipers. This is what it looked like in June. We put in about 900 plants, plugs in this property. And this is what it looked like 2 months later. Things bloomed out of season. In August, we should not have coreopsis or phlox or spiderwort blooming, but they grew enough and we're ready to set seed and get going in 2 months. This was our house in Frankfurt when it was first built, and we had this path around to get to the lakeside. And this is what it looked like after we landscaped it with Michigan native plants. It became a real cool, pleasant, calm oasis area, and walking through it was just a happy place. And this is why we do it. This guy came a couple years ago, just is right outside my office. And so any information that you want to take you for, I know I've just poured so much information on you. It's a lot to cover. Plantedwild.net has all the lists of books and the resources you need for caterpillars, for bees, for plants, for landscaping ethics. We have places where to buy these plants locally, plus 2 mail orders. We have plant lists so you can see plants, read about them. So if you, I was going to, start giving you websites to go to. It's all here. So that should help you get started. And then I just want to thank you so very much for staying with this, and encourage you, please go wild, go native where you are. It will make a difference. Got questions?
Yeah, and I'm just typing in the chat that we will send out a follow-up email with the recording of this presentation, the survey, and all the links that they need that we've shared throughout.
Good.
So we do have a few questions, just odds and ends that have been throughout. Someone wanted a clarification of what's invasive versus naturalized, which I thought.
Oh, that's a very interesting question.
And I wrote that down. I probably could have answered that myself, but
Right.
maybe you could put it in better terms.
It's a very interesting question, because I was talking to somebody, I think it was the Antrim Conservation District have lilacs on their seedling sale. And I wrote to them and said, why would you be pushing lilacs? And so in this conversation, I think it was on Facebook, someone said, well, Mackinac Island has the Lilac Festival, of course. Well, no, they're not native plants. They are naturalized. We accept them because they've been here a very long time, but they do not provide the full benefits. I mean, I don't know the percent of pollinator nectar in their flowers, but we know nobody eats their leaves. And so just because we're used to it, especially like the autumn olive, they're everywhere, doesn't mean they're good.
Mm-hmm.
They just have been something we've gotten accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that helps the questioner.
Yeah, absolutely. And also naturalized, like technically means that it can reproduce on its own, even if it's non-native.
Yes.
And the difference between that and an invasive would be that invasives cause harm.
Yes.
Not all non-natives cause harm,
Right.
but all invasives do.
All, yes, that is a very good, yeah. Invasive species cause harm to the ecosystem because they replace what should be growing there naturally.
Yes. There were a couple questions about deer browsing. So someone said, deer ate my bottle gentian. How deer resistant are native plants? I did answer this saying that no native is truly deer proof.
Right.
No. But then someone else, but there are some that they favor.
Yes.
And I shared a list of
anything with a scent, anything with a textured leaf, deer typically leave alone. So we have a few of those and not very much. Typically, they don't eat cedar. When they're on a starvation diet, they will eat cedar. They will eat what they need to eat to survive. So in my yard, I have a dog, and my dog is my best deer deterrent. She has an electric fence. She can get to most of the beds, not all of them. We have some that are outside her range, but just her presence helps a lot. There are products. We wrap certain things. I have trouble with rabbits girdling my stems. And so we will put deterrent up. We will put chicken wire around the serviceberry to keep the rats, I mean, not the rats, the rabbits from girdling them. Deer are a problem, and you can wrap things. You can use plant skid, scented things. They tend to get familiar with the bad odors. And so you really need to have a couple different products and change them up. So, you know, if you use liquid fence for 3 months, then go to plant skid for 3 months, then go to something else, because they learn.
Yes, and I will also throw out, I have seen in a few gardens, solar powered frequency machines, where if you know, they sense motion at night, it'll send out a frequency that it's only annoying to humans, but it's really annoying to predators.
Yep. And there are a lot of those mechanical things that will turn on a sprinkler and spray water. You know, there's lots of choices to try to do it, but in terms of keeping deer out of your garden, it isn't going to happen. They're here. We have too many of them. There's not enough habitat for them.
Yep.
And so they are.
It's a sign of a greater problem too, if they're only coming to your house because you have native plants and everyone else has invasive ornamentals.
Yeah.
They have nothing else to eat elsewhere.
Right.
Can I change it to chickens? We had a specific question about, and I don't have chickens, so I don't know. Someone said that they're planting a native bed, and we're wondering if anyone knows how long they need to keep chickens out of it for 1 season or more. I'm not sure, and I'm going to throw that out. So if folks who have chickens can throw that out in the chat.
Throw that out. I am not experienced with chickens and how they pull things up. Deer have pulled plugs out of the ground at my house. I just plugged them back in. Native plants will grow very deep roots. And so given time, and who knows how long that will take, but something like the Indian grass that I have in my wet bed, those roots get to be 15 feet deep. I don't think a chicken is going to bother that plant. And so once those roots, and the Prairie Nursery catalog used to have a section that included the type of root, whether it was a tap or fibrous, and that information in it. This year in their new catalog, they didn't have that in it. And I found that to be very helpful. So if you can look at the root type and use that information to see how long you think you need. It took my husband and me 3 hours, the two of us working together in sand, to dig up a false blue indigo to move it. Yeah, and it hadn't been there that long, you know. It was just, oh my goodness, the roots were so tremendous. So whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years, I think you can pretty much, you know, chicken proof it that way. They won't pull them out of the ground. I don't know if they'll eat them or not. You know, can't help you on the chicken question.
That's okay. Someone asked what you would recommend for the width of paths. If you have those path lawns going through separate gardens, they're just starting this process and wondering, I said it might be up to their preference, but if you have any information or
you're going to have to maintain them. And so you're going to want to have it at least 2 mower widths.
That's an excellent point. Yes.
You know, we're going to be adding another sacred grounds at the church this year, and it's going to be a tree and shrub bed. It's going to be across the lawn from the pollinator bed we just did. And so we have to figure out from the landscaper who comes and mows how wide they need. I don't want to make their job harder. So what's it take for 2 passes? So is it mowers are what, about 24 inches wide?
Mhm.
So I'd say he probably wanted to be at least 4 feet wide. But again, it's your preference. If you're going, between a shade bed, it could be less because you're not going to have to do as much maintenance.
Mhm.
So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, and then there was another question. This was more specific towards this person, but we do get lots of questions about septic drain fields.
Yes.
So this particular situation is sandy and early sun,
Right.
but they were looking for something. Obviously, you can't have incredibly long roots. If there was anything off the top of your head.
Well, I would go with something that's fibrous instead of taproot
Okay.
for that. And nothing that's in the tree or shrub family.
Mhm.
I did my pocket meadow over my septic field, and I'm hoping that will be fine.
Okay.
But if the Prairie Nursery catalog, again, is a good resource, they have a seed mix for septic fields.
Oh, great.
And so if you went to the prairienursery.org and looked at their catalog, and it's near the back, and looked for their septic seed mix, you could find out the ones that they believe are beneficial in that sandy, gravelly area and are not harmful.
Great.
So I hope that helps that question.
That's a great example. And someone asked about northern Michigan biomes. I'm not sure if this was something that you mentioned in your presentation or it's just a general question. About what would you categorize the where you find trout lilies and leeks, kind of those shady woodlands.
Oh, yes.
What would you characterize that as, that environment?
Well, that is a northern hardwood forest.
Yeah.
Because those plants need the sun in the spring. So you're not going to find them where you have conifers. They tend to be moist in the spring. They have a lot of leaf litter, of course. The question I get a lot is when you leave your leaves and you're supposed to leave them until it's 50 degrees and people say, well, my plants, I have to uncover it for my plants. And I just say, have you ever seen scouring rush come through blacktop? Fern come through blacktop? Mm-hmm. Your plants will be just fine. They will, if you uncover them, they will look weakly and without their chlorophyll, but once they get to the sun, they will be just fine because that's what the trillium and the trout lily and the bloodroot, they all know how to find the sun. And so we don't have to worry about leaf litter. But yeah, the northern hardwood forests would be what I would consider for the ephemerals, and that's where you find them.
And speaking of ephemerals, this is a fun one.
Yeah. They
asked what your favorite native flower. I think they're talking about spring ephemerals. They go, that's not trout lily. So favorite spring ephemeral that's not trout lily.
Oh, man.
Hard to pick a favorite.
Yeah. I like celandine poppy. Ooh, they're nice and bright and yellow. Spring beauty, you can't miss them. I don't know if you all know, it has the hot pink stripes on them. They're little tiny flowers. They're probably smaller than a dime, but they have these hot pink stripes. And it's like a landing zone. It's like, we're here, we're here. They are living for pollination. They close when it's cold. They close when it's wet. They open when it's 50 degrees and sunny because that's when the pollinators will be moving. They're very much into self-preservation. So I think that spring beauty's got to be my favorite.
Okay, and I will throw out a fun fact about trout lily since we mentioned it, that a local botanist, Leona May, pointed out to me a couple years ago, is that trout lilies have different colored anthers. There's yellow,
right,
orange, and red. 3 different color anthers.
Okay.
And so I think that's just the coolest thing ever. And so when I pass by a trout lily now when they're in bloom, I have to go look at what color they're going to be. Yeah.
There must be some biological reason because it must attract different species with that color.
Yeah. I don't know why, but she told me that was the case. And now I have to look every time. There's my fun fact for you guys. And then I think the last question here that I have written down is what are some grasses that are native to northern Michigan? I did link a resource for this, but if there's any that are your favorite or like your
Oh yeah, I
go-to.
love, our grasses are all the clump forming grasses. You cannot beat little blue stem for anything. It'll grow on the roadsides. It's a dune plant. It is beautiful all season long. You get a mass of it and it looks like a sea waving. And it's one of the shortest one we have is June grass. It blooms the earliest in June. So when everything else is blooming, it's got a brown or golden seed head because it's gone to seed already. I love side oats, grandma. When they bloom, they are fire engine red. We don't always think of our grasses having color in their blooms, but if you look at a side oats blooming, the Indian grass blooms yellow and they have big fluffy heads. They're tall. So we've kind of got the shorter grasses, the side oats. Prairie dropseed is our most formal looking grass. I have those in my foundation bed. Those are what I use as my fillers around my shrubs. And I have prairie smoke as the low ground cover in the front and build as it goes back. And then wherever I need a filler, I put in prairie dropseed.
Awesome. And I tricked you. The last actual question is, how are deer and rabbits different than pollinators and birds? And I think that this is referring to deterring rabbits and deer versus pollinators and birds.
The mammals, rabbits will eat the grasses and things, and plants. They're not at risk. We're not losing rabbits. We're certainly not losing deer. If we were finding a serious decline, we would be looking very carefully at what rabbits eat and trying to feed them. We've got a crisis with our butterflies, our insects, our pollinators, and we have to, it's like they've got the house that's burning. We need to grow the plants for them. Rabbits, they're just adorable. And they eat whatever they want to eat and they're not in decline. And deer, I don't know, I think we should have a larger hunting season to balance. I think they're out of balance. And so if we could get deer to balance with the ecosystem, we'd be in better shape. So it's not that we're favoring one over the other. We're saying that these are not in crisis.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. I think that we addressed everyone's questions and it's almost 7:50. So I'd like to remind folks that, I can put on my video. I'd like to remind folks that we will be sending out a follow-up email probably early next week with a survey that we'd love for you guys to fill out if you enjoyed this. Information and the links that Cheryl mentioned, we will include in that as well as her contact information and a link to the recording on GTCD's YouTube page. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Cheryl so much for joining us. We really had a great time and thank you all for joining.
I loved it. I hope you did too. Bye-bye.